This panel is all about the value of youth work in formal and informal settings. And as Lee said, I did some work with the NYA and some other panel members who are here in the audience today on the relationship between youth work with schools. We produced this report earlier in the summer, which I hope many people have seen, and that was a sort of 10-year-on report from an initial report we did back in 2013-14, which I chaired as well. And I think what we uncovered is probably everything that we researched and recommended 10 years ago is even more applicable and necessary now. And so there are some, I think, some really good recommendations and observations in this report about how youth work isn't some sort of standalone strange thing that goes on in odd youth clubs. It is absolutely essential and mainstream to our young people in so many different scenarios, particularly schools. And it's absolutely complementary to schools as well. At a time when we are now seeing the impact of lockdown and the pandemic, the 100,000 or so ghost children and young people the Children's Commissioner has revealed who are not fully in school, youth work is absolutely an essential component for working with those kids on an empathetic basis to try and understand some of the underlying problems, to tease them and prompt them back into school and give them the support to be able to do that. So youth work isn't some add-on luxury as it's been treated for too many years. It's an absolutely essential component of young people growing up, getting education, getting ready for work, their relationships with their families and their friends and their communities, their mental health, again a huge challenge that we've had. So I'm really pleased that we're having this very well attended event today. Now we've already run over time, so I'm not going to speak for any more because we have 4 excellent speakers here to give some brief introductions, and then we're going to try and open it up to as many questions as possible. Is everybody in the right room? Let's just check that now. It has happened before, but they're not. So, as Lee said, we have 4 speakers. I'm going to start off with Ruth Marvel, who's the CEO of the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme. I've got a little bit of a biography, which I'm just going to read out very quickly. The Duke of Edinburgh's Awards lives by the mantra, youth without limits, and offers outdoors and enrichment opportunities to young people across the country. I think everybody knows that. It's such an essential component part of young people's lives in this country. So Ruth, to kick us off, it's going to be good to hear your reflections on the value of informal education and how youth work and enrichment should be recognised as playing a role on parity of esteem with formal education as well. Ruth, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Is that microphone close enough? Again, can you hear?
Can you hear me all right, everyone? Okay, all right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you to NYA for hosting and inviting me today. I think I've got about 3 minutes, and I could probably talk about the subject for about 3 hours, so I will try and keep my remarks brief. I wanted to make 3 points as to kind of why enrichment is so valuable and why it should be treated on a par with academic education. Firstly, I think we all know in this room that enrichment helps young people develop the sort of essential soft skills, I never really like that phrase, but for life and work. So skills like independence, resilience, self-belief, teamwork, problem solving, leadership, and these are things that you can only really learn through experience. You can't learn them from a teacher, you can't learn them from a textbook. And not only are these sort of skills and capabilities absolutely fundamental to young people being able to sort of thrive in adulthood, we know that the sort of academic curriculum is such at the moment, has become so narrow but also so full in terms of kind of taking up so much of, I think, the school day and sort of teacher headspace, that we are kind of seeing enrichment sort of opportunities and activities sort of squeezed out of this space. So I kind of see it in some ways as if, you know, this sort of soft skills, this experiential education is absolutely both complementary, but it's sort of the other side of the coin from formal academic education. And so we are, as we've seen over the last sort of decade or so, I think the devaluing of this sort of education and the sense that academic education is sort of taking up so much headspace is meaning that we have got lots of young people leaving formal education with without some of these core skills and capabilities. And not only, I think, do we see this in the youth sector, but I think employers are sort of mirroring and feeding this back to us in increasing numbers. Young people are not equipped, essentially, to sort of move into the workforce. Young people are saying this, but also employers are saying this too, and we're seeing increasing efforts on behalf of employers to try and help young people develop these sorts of skills and capabilities, because that is what you are needing to cope in today's workplace. I was with some employers sort of last week, and they were sort of echoing this point that, you know, they employ and they sort of recruit for sort of attitude, because they can train in sort of hard skills and the kinds of sort of qualifications that they need. But having young people who've got a bit of sort of get up and go, who can solve problems, who can act independently and kind of, you know, manage their own time, are absolutely essential. And we are, I think, failing young people in terms of not giving them the opportunities to develop these skills. Secondly, I'd say that enrichment is particularly valuable for those young people who are less advantaged and who find the academic curriculum harder. This year, 25% of young people didn't achieve a standard pass for English and maths. 25%. And that essentially is, you've got young people who have their academic education has been largely, well, their formal education to 16 has largely been academic in nature, because there was so much value put on the sort of exam results. But 25% of those young people are leaving school without the qualifications that we have had such a focus on, and as a consequence haven't been given the opportunities to develop the kinds of skills and talents that may not be particularly valued in the academic world, but can be very valuable in the real world. So one of the things that sort of the mantras of Duke of Edinburgh's award is that we want young people to be able to experience and try and do the things that they find interesting in order to be able to almost discover what they're good at. And I think school and enrichment is such a crucial part of helping young people discover what they're good at. And if it doesn't match that sort of academic curriculum and the skills and capabilities we find valuable in that, then young people are kind of missing out on opportunities to really understand where their skills and talents lie, and hopefully sort of pursue a career path that will enable them to maximise those. We know that young people who are from more marginalised and disadvantaged backgrounds, there's a clear correlation between exam results for those young people. There's a clear correlation between, you know, fewer opportunities in terms of well-paid jobs and career. So in that sense, I think seeing enrichment as a tool for social mobility, as a tool for kind of making sure we're helping young people to develop those young people who are more likely to be disadvantaged by the current school system is even more important. Hence the kind of importance of, I think, investing in these sort of opportunities and making sure that all young people can access them. Thirdly, I was going to say that enrichment, the big advantage of enrichment is it's fun, or it's supposed to be. And participation in enrichment is voluntary. Young people are allowed and encouraged to pursue and do the things that interest them. And we know that doing the things that interest you and that you enjoy, you're more likely to be good at. So there's this sort of virtuous circle of kind of giving young people opportunities to pursue skills, interests that they both enjoy and are good at, and that helping them to identify the kind of strengths and skills that are going to potentially and hopefully sort of stand them in good stead for later life. So we are looking at record levels of persistent absence from school, and I think it's probably not a surprise that young people are, for many young people, school is just not very enjoyable. We obviously have the impact of the pandemic to take into consideration, but I think this is probably an issue that sort of predates the pandemic. You know, for some young people, school just really isn't a place that they want to be. So thinking about how we use enrichment as a lever to kind of get young people back into school, to make education and learning something that's fun and engaging and satisfying, not just a sort of a chore to be sort of endured until you can get out the other end. And I think linked to that, you can also see a trend in terms of the academic curriculum where, with the focus on sort of EBAC subjects, that young people are increasingly actually not getting sort of the same access that they did to some of the creative GCSE subjects, so sort of music and art and drama, technology. and access to things like, you know, sports and PE and drama and art and sort of trips away are also sort of increasingly limited. So I think that sort of opportunity to reimagine kind of what school is for and how it should feel to go to school is something that sort of is in our grasp and we should take advantage of. Those are my 3 points.
Ruth, thank you very much. Thank you for those 3 points. I think many of us, whilst at the same time we need to improve school standards to make sure kids have got qualifications that are going to help them to get a job, at the same time school is about confidence building, team building, making decent young adults who can then go out and succeed as well. And that's not all about having a piece of paper in your hand, so it strikes a lot of chords there. Right, secondly, I have Jenny Addison, who is Alternative Provision Specialist Task Force Head Teacher and Project Coordinator for the DFE, representing Saffron Valley Collegiate in Croydon. I think we're going to hear, Jenny, about how multidisciplinary approaches in education can support young people to achieve positive outcomes, and your view on the value of youth work within the ASPT or APST workplace, drawing on the evidence and impact so far.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks very much. So I do actually know who's paying my pension, because I retired at the end of August. So this is what retirement looks like. So up until that point, I was the head teacher of Saffron Valley, which is Croydon's maintained secondary pupil referral unit. And for the last couple of years, we have benefited from something that has been absolutely transformational for the pupil referral unit and for many of the schools that we serve in Croydon as well. And it resulted from the DFE asking some questions, listening to the answers, and then working so well to be able to lever a shed load of funding for 22 AP settings nationally for us to trial a pilot of multidisciplinary teams co-located within our AP settings. It has transformed us and our reputation in Croydon from people thinking of us as the council's refuse and recycling centre to the council, one of the council's hospitals, yeah? Because that's what we do now, because we now have the resources to be able to support those young people in a way that we knew we always needed to. And so what is our task force? What does it consist of? Now, and it is a bit like Avengers Assemble. I'm not even going to underestimate it. It really is. We have a mental health lead who leads a team of therapists providing a range of therapies to our young people. We have a family worker, we have a speech and language therapist and assistants. Not everybody works full time. We have an assistant psychologist, we have a representative from the Youth Justice Service, and of course we have a youth worker. And what I do need to tell you is this is how successful this pilot has been. This youth worker has been with us since the start of the pilot in September of 21, and there was a reorganisation within the council, because she was seconded from the council within the youth service, and rather than go into that reorganisation, she chose to jump and be directly employed by us, the pupil referral unit, to the end of the extension period, which is now March 25, even though she knew that there was we couldn't give any assurances about a job after March 25, because she said, I have now found the way that I want to work. Some of the benefits that we hoped for and that we've seen are around how this youth work has supported the safety planning for our young people. And I'm going to assume that you already will know what we have to do in terms of keeping young people safe and often keeping young people alive, yeah? Whether that be from external threats or from their own self-harm and extreme mental health. I'm going to assume that. When she puts on her holiday activities, we, the first time we did it, the first tranche, we had to really sort of work at getting young people to come along to those. Last summer, we had a waiting list. We did as much as we could in-house, but when it came to the residential, we had to open a waiting list. And we were able to pull some of those young people in. So that was what we'd hoped for. We had really hoped that we would be able to build strong links with community youth organisations, but we weren't sure that would happen. Tick. We've managed to do that. We had a 3-week summer holiday programme, and at the end of the 3-week, our young people went to the community organisation. And so some of those young people who had been frequent missing episodes during the term, we knew where they were. They were plugged in. It was wonderful. So we feel that a lot of our young people now have safe places. They feel safe in school, but they have safe places in the community as well. And they have safe places at times that we're not available as a school. I think I've resonated so much with a lot that we've said. I have a picture in my mind of what well-adjusted families look like. And one of the features of that is that you will have a parent moaning, I paid for them to go to Kung Fu, and they went for 4 weeks, and then they never went back, and then they wanted to do gymnastics, and then they didn't do that, and now all he wants to do is draw. And you think, yeah, so they did that, and they did that, and they did that, and then they found their passion, right? That's what you want. Well, this is what our youth worker does. She builds this, have a go. Have a go. You may not like it. You may not be good at it. You may like it and be no good at it, you know, but have a go. Have a go. And then I've seen her transfer that because she's located with us and she's there during the school day. I've seen kids coming out of science, let's say, coming out of a science lesson, mid-lesson, and communicating, I'm not very keen on science, maybe other language, and her pick them up and say, no, seriously, this is one of the things that you might not be very good at and you might not like, but tick it off, just tick it off, yeah? Tick it off, and then what you really want to do, you will be able to do, yeah? For the rest of your life, and then change your mind and do something else that you really want to do, yeah? And so she brings that. But, okay, some of the, just for 30 seconds now, just some of the other things that we didn't expect to be a benefit is, this is actually the way our specialists want to work. They want to be able to put Hydra together and say, right, I've got to do this bit of work with this young person, go to the speech and language therapist, how do I put it to her? Go to the mental health lead, is this the right time to do this? Or when shall I do this? They love to work like it. There's a passion and an energy that we're able to bring to this work that we never had before.
Jenny, thank you very much. Lots of nodding heads there. I didn't know, is Kung Fu still a thing?
Yes.
Is it? Fine. Right, let's go on to Dave Parr, who's the CEO of the Oasis Charitable Trust. And it was the first place we visited for the report we did on youth work at the Oasis Academy down at Waterloo. And I've been there before, and it's just a fascinating, so much more than just a school. And it's all about working with the communities, the families, to make sure they're all right, and if they are, you might get a bit more out of them at school and keep them at school and keeping them keen to learn and expand and develop in the best possible way. So it's a fantastic project down there, and Dave's going to tell us more about it in this context.
Great, thank you. Fantastic to speak to you all. Just a tiny bit more context about Oasis. So we run 54 schools around the UK, looking after about 32,000 children and young people every day of the week. And just as you've said, really, our aim is wherever we work that we're delivering integrated work together. So that might be education through our schools, but youth work, children's work, family support work, community building projects, be that debt advice, food banks, food pantry, social enterprise projects, in a really integrated way, and we call that an Oasis Hub, one of which is in Waterloo, and you saw some of on the film earlier. I just wanted to say three things, really. I guess I witness day in, day out, therefore, the interaction between youth work and education in our schools, and wanted just three small thoughts about that, really. First one is, this might seem really obvious, but just the relationship building that a youth worker can do in a school is different to the relationship building a teacher can do in a school. It's of a different nature, and that's a good thing. Youth workers are able to build trusted relationships in our schools that are about advice and advocacy and pastoral care and family support and community connection and values and purpose. And frankly, that allows the teachers to be teachers, as long as we can allow the youth workers to be youth workers in that context too. And just a little thought on that I think there's huge power in those trusted relationships in our schools with our youth workers, as long as they're allowed to be youth workers, as long as they've got that little sense of independence, as well as integration and connection with the school, and it's got to be both in order for those relationships really to thrive. Secondly, therefore, I think it involves huge understanding. So in Oasis, we employ the teachers, we also employ lots of youth workers. Both sides of that coin have actually got to understand one another better than I think they do sometimes. I think teachers and educational professionals need to understand much more and be trained about youth work. What are the values of youth work? What are the cultural differences? How do you best use youth work in an educational context? The fact that it's voluntary and informal in its nature. Equally, I think our youth workers need to be trained and understand better the educational world. How does Ofsted really work? What does it really take to work in a really highly regulated environment? What are the pressures that schools currently face? How can youth work support different bits of the curriculum as schools go about it? And I think both sides of that equation need to understand one another better. Otherwise, the risk is that either youth workers get sucked into just being a school staff member, and frankly, you might as well just have employed an attendance officer or a school pastoral worker, or the risk the other way is that nobody speaks the same language, and therefore there is no partnership because youth workers are not able to speak the language of schools. So I think there's a real training understanding point to get education and youth work working together, even in Oasis, where we actually employ both sides of the coin, if you like. Thirdly, is about breadth. I think one of the opportunities but challenges is that in a school context, I think youth work can become quite focused quite quickly on specific things. So we've talked about absence in school and persistent absence. It can be focused really quickly on that, or it can be focused quite quickly on mental health needs, or it can be focused quite quickly on behavioural needs. And all of those sort of targeted versions of youth work are great and really important. But I guess my call would be to ensure that youth work retains its breadth, and that we're able to do open access youth work as well as targeted youth work. And the reason for that is the relationship build that I started with. In Oasis context, there's huge power in that relationship that is slightly different from the school context. But that only happens because in our context, you meet a youth worker on the street before school. Stu's sitting in the audience here, and I saw Stu before school in the street, meeting the young people as they went to school, but also running the Open Access Youth Club, also doing things in the holidays and at the weekends, and also in school doing the targeted work. And in order to get the relationship build, you need all of that working together. So I guess schools can quite quickly push to really targeted interventions. I think the breadth of youth work is important to keep that relationship build. And so I'll just finish by saying I think this is such a critical conversation. You know, just looking at our 54 schools, there is a mental health crisis going on in our schools. There is an issue with persistent absence. There is a whole generation of young people that are recovering from COVID and that are, you know, X number of years into their school journey. There's violence increasing in our communities, and so getting the linkage between education and youth work right, I think, is fundamentally important in the way in which we might be able to tackle some of those issues together. So I shall step there and look forward to the chat.
Dave, thank you very much. It's that complementarity between schools and youth work, and the universality of youth work. It's not just something that's there for problem kids or those who've got behavioural problems or whatever. It's there for everybody. You can advantage from it in some way, and it's not stigmatising in that respect as well. And that's what they do so well at Oasis. Right, last but not least, sitting patiently on the end, is Precious, who's a young representative from the NYA. And it says here, Precious is passionate about improving education for young people, particularly in the areas of financial literacy, professional etiquette, learning about different cultures and funding, and has campaigned about this during her time as a member of the Youth Parliament. So, Precious, good to hear from you on your reflections on your lived experience of youth work and how engaging with youth workers helped you.
So reflecting on my lived experience, I can confidently say that youth work has had a huge impact on my journey. Youth work to me is not just a profession, but it is the commitment to guiding and empowering young people through their paths. And it is something I can say I have experienced with my youth workers. In comparison to interactions with my teachers, engaging with my youth workers was a completely different experience. Whilst teachers are instrumental in developing intellectual knowledge, my youth workers extended their influence beyond the classroom, supporting personal growth. So what I learned is most youth workers have the ability to connect on a personal level, and they are always willing to help navigate emotions, dreams and challenges that young people may face. The impact of a youth worker goes beyond academic achievement. They become mentors, confidants and advocates for us as young people. And in my experience, with my youth worker became an advisor in times of uncertainty for me, but also someone that could be a source of inspiration whenever I was striving for greatness. So overall, I would like to say my journey is a testament of the impact that youth work has had. And it is a reminder that education extends beyond textbooks and classroom work. It is an endeavour that requires the collaborative efforts of both teachers and youth workers. And together they create a nurturing environment for us as young people to flourish into seeds of potential and blossom in a future of limitless possibilities. And that is why I think education and youth work go hand in hand and are so important to be together. Thank you.
Precious, thank you very much, and particularly thank you for being the only one who spoke within their time limit. Which, and you can still make your point within those 3 minutes very well as you did. Well done. Thank you very much to all our panel. Now, look, we've got a while. I want to take as many questions as possible for people from the audience. A lot of subjects have been raised there. We might take them in groups. Can you stick your hand up if you want to ask a question and start off by just saying who you are and where you're from? We're going to start with you over there, so I've seen first. We've got a microphone close by? Yep, right next to you.
Hello, hi. My name is Lee Eastland. I'm a lead youth worker in the Edge Youth Hub in Manor House, which is a youth club that is supported by the local authority, Hackney Council. My question is kind of for all of you, but it kind of leads off some of the stuff that Dave said. Not only do we work in an open access youth club, which is a universal provision from Monday to Friday, which works quite well for most young people, we also do targeted work in schools. But one of the major problems that we have within some of the schools, especially in Hackney, some of the academies that have started to push through into that are very popular in different areas in Hackney are not as supportive to the work that we're trying to do within the schools. Some of the schools that we work there more of an independent basis are very, very welcoming into having us in the spaces, working with their young people, trying to support bettering their outcomes. But we've been met with quite a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Resistance from some of those academies and their mindsets. They feel was that we're perhaps trying to take their work away from them, we're perhaps trying to overpower them and discredit them as teachers and trying to make this like unspoken divide of informal educators are better than formal educators. So I also wanted to say thank you for your mindset and the things that you said around work, talking about the importance of how formal education and informal education go hand in hand to better the outcomes for young people. My kind of question to all of you or whoever is in the space as well is what can we do to kind of break away from these things? These, in my opinion, over the last 10 years as someone who's worked and lived in Hackney, is they are given a ridiculous amounts of power to behave in the way that they need to. I know that teaching is difficult. I've got friends that are teachers. It's hard. You've got a class of 30 children. You don't really have time to think of all the contextual stuff that youth workers do in the background of what's going on for young people.
Okay.
You know, you're... Sorry, go on.
I think we got
My
the
bad.
question. You've had
Sorry,
multiple
sorry, yeah.
speakers. Right, that's a really interesting point, because actually when we first did our study, and I was surprised at this, it was some of the academies who were the most interested and put forward submissions about the link with youth work. And whether that has changed. And Oasis is clearly a case complete to the contrary. Dave, do you want to pick that up, whether you are an exception or whether it's the rule?
Yeah, I mean, long burn on that. I think there's a real need for the value of youth work being taught in teacher training, so initial teacher training, so you go into your career knowing the value of it, so you don't get to the situation you described. I think there is a bit of a change, in my experience in the multi-academy sector, that they are looking now for community responses and youth work responses in a way that I'm not sure they were several years ago, so I do feel like there's a bit of a shift. I think the implementation is the bit that's the challenge. So how do you actually do it? How do you do it well? So, and that is something to do with each other understanding each other's world. So I think youth workers need to be able to go into schools and speak the language of schools, so they're actually solving problems that are felt needs in schools, and I'm not sure that's very easy to do always. So I think something about finding the right language to be able to go into schools. But I think there's a bit of a change on the way.
Jenny?
I totally agree, and I think it goes back to what you were saying about speaking one another's language as well, and understanding one another's settings. And I think, yes, it is something that you visit within teacher training, but I think it's some ongoing CPD, and it's some ongoing dialogues, and there should be places where we can each look at, you know, models of good practice, and I know this is on its way, really, I think. And those of us who are sold on it need to get behind it, I think, and sell it to our own sectors.
There's also the issue of how Ofsted regard it, which is what we covered in our report, because if Ofsted aren't interested in it, then the schools are going to be less interested in it because they don't have to do the work for Ofsted, which is why we challenge Ofsted as to how they recognise, appreciate, engage youth work, and I think they've admitted they need to do further work on that, and that may be part of the problem as well. Right, more questions. Now we've got lots. Okay, I'll take several together. I'll take those three in the middle, then I'll come back on this side. Lady here, and then the two behind. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sandra Keaveney. I'm from an organisation called North Aldale Development Trust in Cumbria. We work with about 30 schools in Cumbria. About 10 years ago, we developed a model where, with a school, was working with young people outside of the school setting, but during school hours. And we've also worked with pupil referral units. The issue, and it's going back to the offset kind of issue as well, facing an awful lot of organisations within Cumbria, is our local authority wants anybody that's working in our sector to become Ofsted registered as a childcare facility. Now, for me, all that's doing is making youth work still the poor relation to education. We work with the schools, we developed our model with the school, we go through QA. How do we really challenge this? Because we are going down this route. I sat in a room about alternative provision. We were classed as alternative provision. We are not. We're a youth work provision.
Yeah. Very good point. Thank you. Can we pass it behind you? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Wally Taylor. I am representing the Scouts here today. My question is a bit of a broader one, so feel free to come back to it. I was just wondering, what do you think about having a cross-governmental focus on youth work? For example, having a Minister for Youth and Education joined up together in the next government. And I just wanted to ask if that's something you see as a possibility or maybe feasible or something you'd like for us to work towards. And also, just what are your hopes for the next government if we were to leave that room today and think about it? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And last one behind. Yeah.
So I'll stand up so I can see you. My question's a very specific one. So I'm Chloe Holness from the London Violence Reduction Unit. It's a question for Jenny. So brilliant to hear about that multi-agency model that you're doing. I had a question. If you were to add another specialist into that, who would you add in? And what's happening? What's next for the kind of partnership? And how are you sharing that across London? Because it just sounded great.
Right. Some really good questions there. I'm going to come first to Jenny on the multi-agency model and how you'd add something to it. I'm going to answer straight away now, Scouts, your question about a combined education and youth minister. I was that 10 years ago. When I was Minister for Children and Young People in the Department for Education, I had responsibility for youth policy, youth justice, safeguarding, children in care, and a whole load of other things, which sat very naturally in the Education Department. Now it sits in about 5 or 6 different departments, and it needs to come back to one in the Department for Education. That's my view. And then the other issue about Cumbria and alternative provision, which certainly youth work is absolutely not, and sort of stigmatising aspect of that, which you mentioned as well. Jenny, you go first.
Social worker, without doubt. And I think, and because there are 22 areas who are piloting this, we can look to some of our AP settings nationally that we're working with who also do have children's services within the organisation. Now that doesn't mean that what they're doing is they're doing casework necessarily, but this is about linking up and being holistic, because we've got this going now, we've got this running, and we've got all of those heads coming together. But where we find sometimes we're falling down is where with the young people who have social workers, that it sometimes gets really hard to tie the social worker into the model that we're working in, and it feels as if they're sitting outside of what we're doing with this multi-agency group. And so for me I think that's the missing piece. And yes, in terms of sustainability, DFE are supporting us, and locally we're being supported to really look at joint funding models, really, I think it is, and commissioning, and how we can make this work, you know. And for us in London, I think there are VRU opportunities as well.
Thanks, Jenny. Ruth.
I was just going to comment on the sort of hopes for the next government, and I think, to my mind, at the risk of getting sort of all existential about this, there is a conversation to be had about sort of what is the purpose of education, and how do we kind of connect together all of the different things we know and do in support of young people's sort of development through that, very challenging transition period of adolescence, to create the best possible structures that enable young people to be able to do and have the sort of capabilities and opportunities that we want. I think we've had lots of conversations at the moment about the world of work is changing at the most sort of astonishing speed, and if you're looking at kind of what young people are going to need in terms of the future, adaptability in spades and a huge amount of resilience, and I think actually I don't think our education system is really thinking about what is it that young people are going to need 5, 10 years down the line. So a bit of a moment to sort of step back and say, if we put young people right at the centre of our thinking and our focus, rather than sort of tinker perhaps with the things that we've got at the moment, thinking about, well actually, what do people need to be able to do in order to be able to manage and cope and thrive in the decades ahead.
Can I just add to that a little bit? So I think some of these things schools know they need to do, but just can't do within the confines of how schools operate and the role that teachers have got in the classroom. So back to the point earlier about speaking the right language, I think that's the offer we can go to the education sector with, which is you all know you need to do this, this is the purpose of education, and we can help you get there. And I think that's the sort of missing space, because I sort of think if we want this to be integrated at a local level, which we do, we want youth workers in education to be integrated and not just sitting side by side, but being greater than the sum of the parts. So that means, again, school's got to understand youth work's got to understand school. It's got to start with government being integrated in the way that you just described, really, where you've got one voice coming out about purpose of education and how we would like it to work on the ground, and that's not quite the case at the moment.
How do we put Cumbria on the straight and narrow, and is that a problem with the number of authorities, that Cumbria is not just an outlier? Anybody want to comment on that? Maybe we'll have to write to you afterwards on that. Let's come back to that. Thank you anyway. Right, we had some more questions over here. And anybody else who can take the front round here? Yep, madam, you go.
Thank you. Julie Auger from Essex Youth Services, local authority led youth services. I've got youth workers embedded in lots of multi-agency, multidisciplinary teams, either led by education, social care, youth offending, health, and they're all having an impact. And some of those staff I've not had in my service directly for 5-6 years, but they're all on short one-term contracts. When are we going to learn that this works, and when are we going to properly invest in it? Because we lose staff because they go somewhere else, because they've got mortgages to pay, and they can't do that on a 1-year fixed-term contract. And that is a plea because it's desperately a problem for the whole sector. Massive problem.
Thank you for that. At the back, sir.
Hi, Kevin Jones, Head of Workforce for the National Youth Agency. I just wanted to echo Julie's point. It's a fascinating conversation. And we heard this morning about youth work being valuable in health. And my view is that across all the sectors, youth work essentially performs the same function. It has a relational involvement with young people, which brings useful things to any sector. So the ability to rich and detailed early information, the ability to offer challenge and have it accepted, and the expectation of involvement and service improvement. Is there not some scope through government and through local authorities to build that relational practice into the statutory duty across the sectors so that people recognise that value of youth work? Because it's the only profession that works in that way, and that's what makes it unique and valuable to the other sectors.
Do I have a yes, somebody at last on this side of the room. Sir, we'll take yours and then two. Gentleman with the beard there.
Good afternoon, thank you everyone on the panel, everyone for coming today. I work for an organisation called Here for Youth. We have 33 youth hubs across the country with 400 trained youth mentors. And we work predominantly in the Muslim community to create spaces for young people where they can come, they can feel safe, they can express themselves. And we often do this in their local place of worship, in their local mosque. My question to the panel is, or one really quick example, most mosques, every Friday, they have community service, Jummah, with on average, around 1,000 people that come every week. We now have our young people who are volunteering in those spaces, organising these events. Imagine organising a 1,000-person event every single week. When it comes down to Eid, 10, 20,000 people, we have our young people who are now actively involved in that, getting a type of education they can't get elsewhere, certainly a type of education they can't get until they progress into their careers. My question is, for my community, for our sector, we're very much isolated because we've had 20 years of police-related funding, and we're very scared, very nervous to touch that. Moving forward, how can we start to work with local authorities, with the Department of Education, other groups, other bodies, so that we can join this work together and continue the great work that we're all doing? Thank you very much.
Interesting. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go, because we're going to run out of time, go down the panel to comment on those questions and make any other final points you want to make on that. Some three really interesting issues. Ruth first.
I'll pick up just to comment on the last question. I mean, I think there is an onus on organisations that are working with young people to try and work do as much as possible together. I think what's lovely about people in this room. I think we're sort of preaching to the converted in terms of the value of enrichment and youth work. So, just as a sort of specific example, the Duke of Edinburgh's Board has just licensed our first 4 mosques in Greater Manchester. So we are doing some sort of proactively trying to reach out to members of the Muslim community and kind of engage with young people, sort of taking the awards away on people are at rather than sort of assuming that people will find us. And I think there's an onus on all kind of youth organisations to do that. There is also, I think, a broader point that's been sort of come up various sort of in different ways across this conversation, is that finding ways to recognise the sort of complementary value of different sort of ways in which people are working with young people is sort of has to be something that we are constantly on the lookout for. We're sort of unusual, I suppose, in the sense that we do quite a lot of work across both schools and the community-based youth organisations, which has been one of my sort of bugbears for a while, that actually often schools and community youth organisations don't talk to each other, and yet actually, you know, we all exist to meet the needs of young people and serve young people. So I guess as a final thought, a sort of plea to just make sure that we're constantly thinking about how we can complement each other's work, how we can make sure that we're contributing the bits that we can contribute and kind of working with others to try and speak the same language in service of young people.
Thank you, Dave.
I guess two thoughts. One just about anchor institutions in a community. So youth work in all places, the space is great, but particularly youth work in the anchor institutions in a community, of which schools are one, places of worship are another. And I think finding those spaces where people are already gathered, so we can do this work more easily. And that's the beauty of youth work and education, working together for me. It's a place where young people are already gathered. And then just on the funding short contracts point, I mean, this is not a panacea by any means, because educational funding is as stretched as everybody else, but at least it is recurring funding. So if we can have conversations with our schools to say, you know, here's the value we think we can bring, here's your obligation to Ofsted and others around this breadth that we talked about earlier, there is an opportunity in the mix of that. Schools spend an awful lot of money on alternative provision and, you know, lots of outsourced services. Like, can we shift the dial so they're spending it on this work, which is preventative in the first place? And I think there is potential for that if we can shape up to it together.
Dave, thank you. Jenny?
I totally...
Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, I totally agree about the upstream work. I know that you know, the sector that I work in is around the hospital model. It's around the critical end of things, but we are feeding young people back into mainstream provision. That is our raison d'être. And so we want those mainstream schools to be fit for purpose when our young people go back, and we want them to be as engaging as possible and accessible to those with SEN, and we want them to have those places in the community where they are meeting a diversity of young people who will have had issues that they have had, will not have had issues, and will have all sorts of different makeup. We want them to see that richness. And so really, I think, yeah, that kind of joining up is what it's all about.
Thank you, Jenny. Precious.
I feel like we just need to continue to advocate for the funding of young people, for the recognition, and just keep on raising public awareness that youth work works hand in hand with education, and they collaborate really well to make like success stories for young people. So we just need to keep on advocating for it.
Very good. Right, I've got us back on track time-wise. Let me just make a couple of final points. None of what we've heard here in the last 50 minutes is anything that should surprise anybody. None of it is rocket science, and none of it is really new. It's just really frustrating that we're having to say it again. And at the heart of all this is having a long-term, joined-up approach to youth policy and youth work, which recognises the implicit values and complementarity of youth work and youth policies. I said earlier, it's not just a standalone thing. One of the things I did when I was Children and Young People's Minister all those years ago is we set up a youth action group. It was co-chaired by me and the Chief Executive of Bernardes. It consisted of about 8 ministers and 6 young people's charities, Princess Trust, Bernardes and others. And so often, problems around children and young people are seen in isolation. So what we were there to do was, when there were problems that were multidimensional, as so many things are, we had the minister responsible for housing, a minister from education, a minister from health, could put together a joint solution and approach. And the youth charities brought to us various problems that their members and supporters were experiencing. And I sort of tasked the minister with the relevant civil servants to liaise with the other departments to go and come back with a solution. It wasn't rocket science, and it worked really well. Alas, it didn't survive me, but it was part of what some of us have been trying to do, and that's youth-proofing government policy. In all government policy, we need to think about what is the aspect, what's the implications, the consequences going to be for young people, given that they will be living with the consequences of it for many years to to come. That is not rocket science, but with youth work it is so important, because the preventative upstream interventions we know can save a lot of money, but also the social consequences of not doing stuff earlier is so important. So we will keep on saying it. We'll keep on producing reports which give all the evidence, the data for it, and the people on this panel and all of you here are living it day by day, and hopefully we will have an impact at last. It's just frustrating. There's a bit of sense of deja vu about this 10 years on. But anyway, I've started my bit and now gone over time. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to our panel.